By the end of September, over 14,000 cases of influenza had been noted at Camp Devens, approximately 1/4 of its population, resulting in 757 deaths and a case fatality rate exceeding 5%. From the Flu by Private Josh Lee, 1919. It stalked into camp when the day was damp and chilly and cold. It crept by the guards and murdered my pards with a hand that was clammy and bony and bold. And its breath was icy and mouldy and dank, and it killed so speedy and gloatingly greedy that it took away men from each company rank. Captain Geoffrey Keynes of the Royal Army Medical Corps, the site of the mortuary tents at Beauhain in France. There were rows of corpses, absolutely rows of them, hundreds of them, dying from something quite different. It was a ghastly sight to see them lying there dead of something I didn't have the treatment for. November 11th, 1918, Armistice Day. Sister Catherine McPhee at Casualty Clearing Station number 11 in France. We moved up to Saint-André after the army went into Lille, and almost immediately we started taking in wounded, and many who had Spanish influenza as well. The boys were coming in with colds and a headache, and they were dead within 2 or 3 days. Great big handsome fellows, healthy men, just came in and died. There was no rejoicing in Lille the night of the armistice. So let's look at the 1918 so-called Spanish flu. Okay, the first thing to say is that it had nothing to do with Spain. Okay, the official theory nowadays is that because of wartime restrictions on reporting, they didn't want to panic the population and affect morale in the countries that were fighting the war, and Spain was not taking part in the war. So, you know, there was reporting in Spain, and there wasn't reporting everywhere else. It was hushed up, you know, it wasn't in the newspapers. So that's the theory of why it's called the Spanish flu. Okay, so nothing to do with Spain. The other thing is, there's no real evidence that it was flu, because it's supposed, the official story is that it was an so-called H1N1 virus. So what that is, it's what it means is the virus has a membrane, and there are 2 proteins sticking out of the membrane. One of the things is the 1H, and the other thing sticking out, the other molecule sticking out, is the 1N. And the body makes antibodies to those 2 proteins if you're infected with an H1N1 virus. So you can test someone for the antibodies and say, oh yeah, they've got an H1N1 virus. But there's, and these hoaxes, this 1976 hoax and the 2009 hoax were based on the idea that, oh yes, it's a rerun of the 1918 Spanish flu. We're all going to die from the Spanish flu. Oh my God, make a vaccine, vaccinate us all. But there's no evidence that it was a virus at all. Viruses weren't discovered until the 1930s. So it wasn't called a virus in 1918. It was called the flu, but they didn't identify the virus. And yeah, so no evidence that it was a virus at all. And all the evidence points to it being a bacteriological disease. All the people who died from, well, there are 2 theories about why they died. They either died from cytokine storm, which is when the body, your immune system overreacts, and basically the immune system kills you, or bacterial pneumonia. So there were 3 waves of the disease. Now, there's been a lot of research into where it started, lots of different theories about where it started. So I just read a paper by John M. Barry from 2004. John M. Barry, distinguished professor of blah, 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 something or other. And he reviewed all the different research into where it started. and he came to the conclusion that it started in Camp Funston in Kansas. Now, Camp Funston is now called Camp Riley, so it's still a military camp there. Another Barry, Kevin Barry, who's an anti-vaccine campaigner, so maybe not quite as objective as you'd want, but anyway, he's done a lot of research into this, and what he found was the surgeon in Camp Riley, a guy called Frederick Gates. Kevin Barry has actually unearthed a report by Gates into his meningitis vaccinations that he ran in the camp. And there was an outbreak of meningitis in, I think, early 1918. And Gates sent off samples to the Rockefeller Institute so they could make vaccines. And the anti-meningitis vaccines came back, and Gates started a campaign of vaccination of all the recruits in the camp. So this is from an article that Kevin Barry unearthed in Practical Mechanics from 1917, and it describes how they make vaccines from horses. So this is what it says. After the horse has been inoculated with the disease poison in gradually increasing doses, he is bled and his serum is found to be antitoxin. This is administered to human beings and renders them immune to the disease. Some horses give more antitoxin serum than others. Okay, so far so good. Oh, yeah, okay. But here's a killer, yeah? The same horse may be used at several different times for the preparation of distinctly different antitoxins. Horses are used in the preparation of diphtheria, tetanus antitoxin, and anti-meningococcus serum. So it's a disaster. Barry has also found a report by Captain Hancock, Captain Torrey, who served at Camp Hancock, just outside of Augusta. And thousands of soldiers died at Camp Hancock. And some who survived the illness probably made it onto ships and spread the disease further. Oh, by the way, the vaccine that Gates ordered from the Rockefeller Institute was sent to all kinds of places. Was sent to England, so that it could have spread that way as well. Yeah, from the vaccine being sent all over the place. Hancock, Torrey describes the symptoms in great detail, and he says the conditions were found in every case examined at autopsy. There were almost no complications outside of the chest. The pulmonary emphysema with consequent venous stasis accounted for the cyanosis, which is turning blue, yeah? Epistaxis, nosebleeds, and fixation of the chest in the face of extreme inspiration. Blah, 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 yeah? So, Barry says it looked like a bacterial infection to him. Autopsies showed lung tissue had been damaged, which restricted blood flow, turning the dyeing a bluish-purple colour due to lack of oxygen. And Torrey says, when the patients tried to inhale, their diaphragms constricted instead of expanded, the opposite of what diaphragms are supposed to do. Fluids then filled their lungs, and many did not survive, literally the fluid in their lungs strangling the soldiers to death. Now, Barry says there's a horse disease which is very similar to that. Barry says there is a highly contagious respiratory infection called strangles, horse respiratory infection called strangles. So horses it's also called horse distemper. He says if this disease can kill horses, what would it do to human lungs if introduced into humans via injection, and therefore bypassing the immune system on a mass scale? So he thinks it's a species jump. He thinks that might be what caused it. So I'm just giving you the highlights of his paper. It's very well written, very well researched. So yeah, look out for that. You can see it on Health Impact News, and I'll flash it up on the video. Yeah, so I'll flash up some of the highlights on the video, and we'll give you a link to the article. The other thing is that another researcher in a 2009 paper, and this was published in the journal Clinical Infectious Diseases, Karen Starko, says that she thinks that a lot of people died from aspirin poisoning. because this was particularly there were 3 waves, supposed to be 3 waves of the infection, and the middle wave was the worst. It was there was a big death spike, she says, in October 1918. And this occurred, the Surgeon General of the US and recommended in the Journal of the American Medical Association, both recommended very large doses of 8 to 13 grams of aspirin per day as part of the treatment. Well, that will give you aspirin poisoning, yeah? Yeah, it will produce hyperventilation in 33% of patients, as well as lung edema in 3% of patients. And the thing is, the aspirin, the reason they were pushing aspirin so much was because the patent, Bayer had the patent on aspirin. They developed it. They isolated salicylic acid from willow bark, which is what Hippocrates used on his patients all those centuries ago. And so, yeah, Bayer isolated it and synthesized it and made aspirin. So the patent had expired, and so the drug companies were pushing aspirin. So I'm sorry about this, okay, I'm just telling you facts. Make up your own conspiracy theories. But here we got Rockefeller making the vaccines. Perhaps, yeah, this is, you know, but it looks, it's pretty convincing to me that, you know, the vaccine, Rockefeller vaccines caused the whole thing. And then we've got Rockefeller drug companies pushing the aspirin, and the Journal of the American Medical Association is still a lackey of the drug companies, and the drug companies are all owned by the, you know, controlled, not 100% owned by Rockefellers, but they're all controlled. They have a controlling stake. Okay, it's well hidden, you know, it's through banks and financial institutions and blah blah blah. But it's the Rockefellers who own them all, who control them all anyway. So yeah, so here we have Rockefellers causing the whole thing, and then profiting, and you know, killing those who might have survived you know, with bloody aspirin. So there we have it. So that's the 1918 Spanish flu. Okay, next. This is the sandwich. We've got several layers. The really meaty part is going to be number 4, which is Kevin Barry's article. Kevin Barry from First Freedom's not-for-profit, which campaigns against vaccines. And I highly recommend their website and their Facebook page. So we're going to look at his hypothesis that the pandemic, the 1918 pandemic, which killed up to 100 million people in 1 year, was caused by an experimental anti-meningitis vaccine made from horses, which came from the Rockefeller Institute. Okay. So that's the meat, the real meat. But we're going to let's look at the layers now. So 5 layers. Number 1, we're going to look at Rockefeller medicine, which we're stuck with. Yeah, what we have today is Rockefeller medicine. In 1914, they endowed all the medical schools, and they had enough money to set up all the drug companies, and so they still have a controlling stake in all the drug companies. Okay, this is not some nutty conspiracy theory. I will give you evidence for this in part 1. Okay, in part 2, we're going to look at how any viral disease can be cured as long as you get adequate vitamin C. Okay, so it's not just a little teaspoonful of vitamin C in water in the morning we're talking about here. We're talking about massive doses of vitamin C, but it doesn't do any harm. We're talking about intravenous, but we'll look at that in a minute. Yeah. In part 3, we're going to look at the orthodox consensus on Spanish flu. There's been a huge amount of research into this, examining preserved tissues from autopsies, that kind of thing, under the microscope, yeah, looking for bacteria or viruses. So we'll look at that, and then we'll get to the real meat, which is Kevin Barry's hypothesis that the pandemic was caused by an anti-meningitis experimental vaccine, which was administered in a military camp in Kansas. Okay. And then we'll have a discussion about the hypothesis. Does it stand up? Is it credible? Does it prove without a shadow of a doubt? Blah, blah, blah. And then we'll look at vaccination in general. Was HIV created from a polio virus? And we'll talk about how to make a superbug weapon, yeah? So this was a superbug weapon. It wasn't made deliberately, but we can draw some lessons. I'm going to give you a quotation from a book by Paul Ewald, an eminent biologist, and he describes how to make a superbug weapon. So, and I think it's got a lot of, we can draw some conclusions from it to substantiate Kevin Barry's hypothesis. Okay, there was a study done in 2009 by Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, and they found that apart from CBS, every single drug company had one board member who was also a board member on a media company. Now, I would go further than that, and I would say that on every on the board of directors of every drug company, you're going to find one board member who is representing Rockefeller interests. That board member will be either working for the Rockefeller Foundation or the Rockefeller Family Trust, or we'll have an association with the Council on Foreign Relations, which has been called the Rockefellers Masonic Lodge. The Rockefellers have a control, you can see that the Rockefellers have a controlling stake in all the major drug companies. You'll also usually find a board member from Goldman Sachs. So the Rockefeller Institute, which made the anti-meningitis experimental vaccine, was set up in 1901. So let's have a look at this book, The Rockefeller File. The original Rockefeller Foundation was established in 1901 and was called the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. It was set up as part of Lee's PR program to clean up the Rockefeller image. Doubtless the Rockefeller money has done much good in the field of public health and scientific research, although there are some who will give you a heated argument even here. Now, the Rockefeller, in 1913, income tax was introduced in the United States. And so Rockefeller, who obviously didn't want to pay income tax on his huge fortune, the biggest fortune that's ever made in the history of the world, and the fortune is still intact and growing. There are about 250 descendants who all live in New York State and on various guarded estates in various parts of the US. So the idea of the foundation was to swap ownership for control. So let's see what this book says about it. Those who believe that Rockefeller philanthropy, even in the health field, is phony, point out the fact that the Rockefeller monies have been used to degrade natural prevention of sickness and disease through vitamins and health foods and promote the use of drugs. Drugs are manufactured mainly from coal tar derivatives, and besides being in the oil business, the family has for decades been heavily invested in the giant drug manufacturing concerns. What income tax became finally was a siphon gradually inserted in the pocketbooks of the general public. Imposed to popular hussars as a class tax, the income tax was gradually turned into a mass tax in a jiu-jitsu turnaround. Each year, the Rockefellers can dump up to half their incomes into their pet foundations and deduct the donations from their income tax. Nelson Rockefeller admitted at the confirmation hearings, this book was written in 1976, when Nelson Rockefeller became vice president, against a lot of opposition in the US, I have to say. The foundation pays no capital gains tax and no income tax, so those funds can continue to multiply. They not only can do, they do. Having the foundations as a tax-free piggy bank is only one of the advantages they provide the family. As Business Week has observed, the real motive behind most private foundations is keeping control of wealth. In the foundation world, where not-for-profit really means not for taxation, one exchanges ownership for control. Okay, so that's the Rockefeller Institute, founded in 1901, and the Rockefeller Foundation was founded in 1914. So all of most of Rockefeller's money went into the foundation, and the foundation was used, the money from the foundation was used to set up, to endow medical schools, all the medical schools in the US, based on the model of the Johns Hopkins Medical School. They also endowed medical schools throughout the world. For instance, the School of Tropical Diseases in London was endowed by the Rockefellers. So that's Rockefeller medicine. So these things aren't part of Rockefeller medicine, okay? Rockefeller medicine was fixed in 2001, and it's still with us, okay? So with Rockefeller medicine, there's no fasting, no hypothermia, no herbal medicine, no nutritional therapies, no vitamin therapies, and above all, no vitamin C intravenous therapy for viral disease. So Thomas Levy wrote a book called Curing the Incurable, and in that book you will find all the studies which prove that that vitamin C taken in adequate doses will cure any viral disease. And in 2009, there's a famous case in 2009 in New Zealand. A man called Alan Smith, I believe. Alan Smith, yes, was diagnosed with swine flu, and he was in a coma. He had wires and intravenous and stuff coming out of him all over the place, and big machines all around him. And the doctors told his family that he wouldn't survive, and to get ready to make the funeral arrangements, blah, blah, blah. And his family weren't ready for him to die, and they contacted Thomas Levy, and Thomas Levy told them what to do. And they asked the hospital to give him intravenous vitamin C, and the hospital wouldn't comply, and the family had to threaten legal proceedings. The doctors did give him vitamin C. They were told exactly how to do it. They gave him intravenous vitamin C, and he came out of the coma. And then the doctors wouldn't go any further. They refused to give him more intravenous vitamin C. So the family took vitamin C, went to his vitamin hospital, and gave him oral vitamin C. So high-dose vitamin C in divided doses throughout the day, a little bit of vitamin C and water. They also gave him Altria liposomal vitamin C. I don't know how many doses they gave him, probably about 5. Liposomal is another way of taking oral vitamin C, but that gets even more vitamin C into you. There's only so much vitamin C you can take orally in water, but liposomal vitamin C allows you to take more. Anyway, that was on the recommendation of Thomas Levy, and the guy is still alive, came out of a coma, recovered, he's still alive and giving lectures all over the place. And if you input swine flu plus New Zealand plus vitamin C, you'll see a 60-minute documentary. The 60 Minutes is a famous New Zealand documentary series. Anyway, they did a 60 Minutes documentary on it. And you'll also see lots of other videos about the case. And you'll see lectures given by Alan Smith. Okay. Now, the other thing is hypothermia. I'll leave fasting for another day. And both the syphilis spirochete and the Borrelia spirochete, which are both very similar and they cause similar symptoms, similar disease symptoms. They both die at 39 degrees C. So syphilis and gonorrhea were treated with hypothermia in US hospitals in the 1930s. So how many, and by the way, if you've got Lyme disease, borreliosis, there are places in Germany which do the hypothermia treatment. They have a special sort of shroud, and they put you in that with infrared heating and intravenous, and they put you out with anaesthetic. So, and they take you very slowly up to 42 degrees C, and they take you very slowly down again. And you come out of that, you think you feel like you've run a marathon, but no ill effects, and that kills the Lyme disease. So. Yeah, so the orthodox way to treat Lyme disease is to give you antibiotics, but there are lots of different strains of Borrelia, so it's hit and miss. You know, is it the right antibiotic for the strain? And then, you know, the bugs are mutating all the time, very hit and miss. Hypothermia works every time. Anyway, so I wondered how many bacteria are killed at, you know, 30 high degrees, 39 degrees, for instance. Our body temperature is 37 degrees, and very easy to get to raise it a couple of degrees. That's why we get fever. That's our body's natural defense against infection. That's our body knows it has to raise the temperature to get rid of the infection. So I wondered how many. So the point I'm trying to make here is that we're stuck with this model of microbiology, yeah, which is great for the microbiology nerds, you know, nerds who like to mess about with bugs in laboratories, but not so great for us, yeah. So so I got some books on microbiology and bacteriology. I've got a couple here that I bought on Amazon. They're out of date, they're very old, so very cheap, you know, just a couple of quid on Amazon. I just wanted to look up all the, you know, for what temperature bacteria die, all the different species of bacteria, at what temperature they die. But what I found was, it's just not given. They don't give the temperatures for the bacteria, you know, for specific bacteria, because it's like a taboo. So here I've got a little extract from McCree and McCartney's Handbook of Bacteriology, and it was published in 1960, so yeah, very old. So here's what it says. Influence of temperature. For each species there is a definite temperature range within which growth takes place. The limits are the maximum and minimum temperatures, and an intermediate optimum temperature can usually be recognized at which growth is most rapid. In the laboratory, bacteria are grown at this optimum temperature in a thermostatically controlled incubator. So the incubator always works at 37 degrees C, yeah? Which is body temperature, never more than that. The optimum temperature of a bacterium is approximately that of its natural habitat, e.g. about 37 degrees C in the case of organisms which are parasitic on man and warm-blooded animals. These and many saprophytes of soil and water, which grow best at between 25 degrees C and 40 degrees C, are termed mesophilic. Some mesophiles have a wide growth temperature range, e.g. 5 to 43 degrees C for Pseudomonas pyocenia, while others are more restricted, e.g. 30 to 39 degrees C for Neisseria gonorrhea. So there we go, not gonorrhea, a bacteria dies at 39 degrees C. None of these grow appreciably at temperatures below 5 degrees C, as in a domestic refrigerator, and few at more than 45 degrees C. So there we have it, lots of bacteria die at 39 degrees C. So why don't we just use hypothermia? Yeah? Antibiotics, hit and miss, bugs are mutating all the time, antibiotics do a lot of damage. Okay? Antibiotics, again, came out of the Rockefeller Institute. Yeah? So there we go. So let's look at the orthodox consensus on Spanish flu. Now, all the literature you see, all talks about H1N1 virus, blah, 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 it's an H1N1 virus. Well, nobody knew what viruses were in 1918. They weren't discovered until 1930. They knew that there were particles, you know, that there were bacteria, and there were things that they couldn't see, that they were called filtrable bacteria. But anyway, so there's no evidence that it was an H1N1 virus. And an H1N1 virus is just a generic term for a flu virus. Anyway, so I've got a very good paper here by a Spanish author, Anton Correca, Origins of the Spanish influenza pandemic and its relation to the First World War. Now, this might be interesting. This might be very relevant to Kevin Barry's hypothesis that the the pandemic was caused by careless administration of an experimental meningitis vaccine. So we'll discuss more about more after we've had a look at Kevin Barry, but we'll just briefly have a look at the orthodox consensus. Loads of research about the 1918 flu, hundreds of papers on it. But this is by a Spanish author, and the reason this is interesting because there was a pandemic in Spain, and Spain wasn't part of the war. So, and there was a pandemic amongst the general population, and that's what gave it the name Spanish flu. There was a big outbreak in Spain, and the restrictions on reporting in all the fighting countries, the countries that were in the war, because they didn't want to affect morale. That's the official story anyway. So yes, this author reviews. So he's gone to. It's a very well written paper, very well researched. So he's gone to the archives of the French army and other sources, medical articles and books published during that period. A variety of archives in France, Spain and Portugal were also consulted to provide more complete information. Now, first of all, and this I've seen elsewhere in other papers, talk about the preceding epidemics of flu. There was the 1889-1890 pandemic in Paris, I think. Yeah. Yes, it was widespread. It was a pandemic, so-called. Yes, in Paris. In 1892 in Paris. Anyway, there were various pandemics before the big pandemic. And then there was one in Étaples, in France, where there was a British camp, British military base at Étaples, situated in the north of France, and this outbreak of so-called flu. Flu, by the way, at that time was a catch-all term. Yeah, anything any sort of high temperature, cough, sneezing, bronchitis. It was all called the flu, and. So there was this outbreak in Étaples between December 1916 and March 1917. Well, this would seemingly blow out of water Kevin Barry's thesis, because this was prior to the administration, apparently prior to the administration of the vaccine at Fort Riley. So that would appear to blow out of water his hypothesis, but we'll come back to that. It might not do. So, quite a bad outbreak. Acute respiratory infection, high temperature and cough. At the time when recognised influenza was present. Signs of bronchopneumonia, pathology history showed acute purulent bronchitis. Heliotrope cyanosis, described extensively in the ensuing 1918 outbreak. And very high mortality. So very similar to the pandemic, which was supposed to have started in 1918. Oh, yes, one other thing. In this paper, I think he talks about 4 waves of the pandemic. Well, how many waves there were depends on who you believe, which paper. In some papers it's 2 waves, in some papers it's 3 waves, in some papers it's 4 waves, and, some of the waves are worse than others, so, not very reliable, It was a pandemic, waves, it was all over the place in lots of different countries. So we'll call it just one pandemic. We'll forget about the waves. So there were. He talks about troops which came from the French colonies, like Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. They fought between 1916 and 19, and. We found many references to periodic epidemics which affected these Indo-Chinese soldiers between 1916 and 1918. They are referred to as Annamite pneumonia. Annamite was the name, Annamite, the French name for Indochina, the colonies in Indochina. morbid symptoms which had brusquely appeared a few hours earlier and which could be summarized as follows: 38 to 40 degrees C, fever, strong cough, occasionally accompanied by vomiting, cephalophalgia, which is headache, yeah, cephalalgia, bad headache, backache, generalized muscular pain, morning visit, 43 new cases, progressively worse cough, expectoration which was sometimes bloody, blah blah blah. And then in New York, influenza epidemic began in February in the USA in the Sing Sing prison in New York. So that was in February 1918. So that was before the outbreak, the outbreak in Fort Riley. So again, seems to blow out of the water Kevin Barry's hypothesis, but maybe not. We'll come back to that, yeah? So, Villers-sur-Coudon, what date was this? From April to 10th November, cases of influenza in the American Army, which was based on French soil between the 15th of April 1918. March, yeah, broke out in March in Fort Riley, so yeah, that might have come from Fort Riley. And now this is interesting. In Madrid, the first country in Western Europe in which the pandemic was widespread among the general population and caused significant mortality, was Spain. It justifies the denomination Spanish influenza used to refer to this pandemic. The first reference in the Spanish press to an epidemic outbreak in the spring of 1918 can be found in the Madrid newspaper El Sol. Seems that many cases are appearing among the soldiers of the Madrid garrison of a sickness which has not yet been diagnosed by doctors. It also broke out in prisons, yeah? Undoubtedly, there is little difference between the disease observed in the prisons by our reporters and that which has been affecting Madrid for the last few days. An author suggested that the Spanish influenza was exported by boat to the USA from Tangier and the Spanish colonies in the north of Africa. Mutated virus at the French-Spanish border. September 18, 1%. Pandemic affected nearby cities such as Biarritz, Vitoria-Gasteiz, or more distant cities such as Bordeaux, Paris, Lyon, Rome, Barcelona, Alicante, or Madrid. Between October and November, this is in 1918, the pandemic had spread to the Balearic Islands, Switzerland, and Germany. By November, the Spanish influenza pandemic had spread to the Straits of Gibraltar, Algeria, Great Britain, Ireland, and other European countries. So he thinks the epidemic in the spring of 1918 was a seasonal and benign influenza epidemic, similar to those which occur almost every year and cause little mortality. If there had only been this one epidemic wave, it would not have been much of historical interest and would not have motivated so much investigation. Okay, so that's a good overview of where the pandemic started, where the various theories, where it started, where it was seen. Oh, there's another theory that it came from Chinese coolies who were imported to dig trenches in France to free up soldiers to fight. So that's another theory, that there was an epidemic in China. Okay, so I've got two things to say after Kevin Barry's evidence, yeah? So we're now on to part 4, Kevin Barry's hypothesis, yeah? Kevin Barry thinks that it may well have been caused by a meningitis, anti-meningitis vaccine administered in Fort Riley, we'll look at that now. Okay, so now we come to Kevin Barry, his article, which you can see on his website, firstfreedoms.com, and also in Health Impact News, the same article is reproduced. Kevin Barry is an anti-vaccine campaigner. He has a non-for-profit and apparently he's an ex-federal prosecutor, I think, or something. Anyway, his article. So this is what he says, yeah, and let's see if it stacks up. So this is his evidence. 95. We'll just quickly run through them, and then I'll see what the documentation is to support it. So number one, 95% or more of deaths caused by bacterial pneumonia. So he says that shows it's not a virus. Well, yeah, the official story is that the bacterial pneumonia was a result of was an end result of was a complication of the influenza virus. But he also says that for further substantiation that it's a bacterial infection and not a virus infection, he says flu attacks young, old, and immunocompromised. And in this case, the Spanish flu attacked mainly people who are in their prime, so between 20 and 40. Okay. The other thing he says, from January 21st to June the 4th, 1918, an experimental vaccine was being administered in Fort Riley. So he says it broke out in Fort Riley in Kansas. Sorry, I forgot to say that. So this vaccine was being administered. Now, I haven't been able to, he gives no source for this, Jan 21st to June 4th. I mean, certainly there was a anti-meningitis vaccine being administered, but I'm not sure of these dates. I've got the study which the doctor who administered the vaccination, Frederick L. Gates, he wrote wrote it up. So I've got that, and in that there's only one date, but we'll get on to that. So, and then he quotes from a PBS documentary, which says, in March over 100 recruits, this is what he quotes from the PBS documentary. Shortly before breakfast on Monday, March the 11th, the first domino would fall, signalling the commencement of the first wave of the 1918 influenza. Company cook Albert Gitchell reported to the camp infirmary with complaints of a bad cold. Right behind him came Corporal Lee W. Drake, voicing similar complaints. By noon, camp surgeon Edward R. Schreiner had over 100 sick men on his hands, all apparently suffering from the same malady. Now, PBS doesn't give a source for that, so we can't check that out. You know, it's probably a reliable source, but we don't know. You know, so. Yeah, now this is interesting. The Rockefeller Institute sent the vaccine to England, France, Belgium, Italy, and others. Now, I don't know where he gets that. Well, let me have a look. Let's see what the Rockefeller Institute say in their Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. So, and also, Barry says that the vaccine was made in horses. So this is a page on serum production from a Rockefeller report. In order to meet the suddenly increased demand for the curative serums worked out at the Institute, a special stable for horses was quickly erected and a special and suitable laboratory staff assembled at the Department of Animal Pathology. And down the bottom it says, reference should be made to the fact that before the United States entered the war, the Institute had resumed the preparation of anti-meningococcic serum in order to meet the requests from England, France, Belgium, Italy, and other countries. So, yes, so this vaccine, this experimental vaccine, was sent all over the place, and the quantities of the several kinds of serums distributed are as follows. 939 litres, or 46,000 bottles of anti-meningococci serum. 344 litres, or 3,500 bottles of anti-pneumococci serum. 78 litres, or 3,918 bottles of anti-dysenteric serum. The amounts partially include the various diagnostic serums issued. So yes, they were sending these serums made in horses all over the place. So yes, and soldiers from Fort Riley, the soldiers were being sent from Fort Riley to serve in France all the time. So let's have a look in detail. 95% or more deaths caused by bacterial pneumonia. Yes, we can substantiate that. Where are we? Here we go. So there's a study, predominant role of bacterial pneumonia as a cause of death in pandemic influenza, implications for pandemic influenza preparedness. So these people got hold of preserved autopsy specimens from victims in the, of the pandemic. We examined lung tissue sections obtained during 58 autopsies and reviewed pathologic and bacteriologic data from 109 published autopsy series that described 8,398 individual autopsy investigations. In the 68 higher quality autopsy series, in other words, the ones where they got the specimens themselves, I guess, in which the possibility of unreported negative cultures could be excluded, 92.7% of autopsy lung cultures were positive for more than one bacterium. Of these 96 series, 82 reported pneumopathogens in more than 50% of lungs examined, either alone or in mixed culture results that included other bacteria. Outbreaks of meningococcal pneumonia complicating influenza also were documented. Now that's interesting because this is what the virus was, anti-meningococcal virus. So, yeah. So that's a flu attacks young, old and compromised. Yes, that's well documented. So most of the people who died were between 20 and 40. And flu usually attacks the young, the old and immunocompromised. It doesn't usually attack, people who between 20 and 40 usually survive with no problem. So, and that fact is well documented in all the literature. So there we have it. So, yeah, and let's just have a look at the report that Kevin Barry unearthed, which is by Frederick L. Gates, a report on anti-meningitis vaccination and observations on agglutinins in the blood of chronic meningococcus carriers. So there's only one date in this. So I don't know where Barry gets his January 21st to June 4th. I guess that's an authoritative source, but I can't substantiate that. Let me just have a look at the one date which is quoted in this study. Here we go. In some regiments, the vaccinations had been completed before February the 5th. So that implies that the vaccinations were still going on. February 5th. And where are we? And it's on March the 11th that all these men start to fall ill, yeah? Signaling the first wave. So 100 sick men on one day. So we don't know what happened after that. Were there hundreds of men going to the infirmary every day? We don't know. So, yeah, another thing in this, let me just see. Yeah, and this study, Barry's found evidence that, they were having adverse reactions. There was some severe adverse reactions. Yeah, here we go, page 454. We'll flash this up, flash the first page up on the video. So, when an initial dose of 200 million was reached, group 5, general reactions began to appear with greater frequency. 4 of them had headaches also, and 1 reported a chill. Arms were moderately sore at the site of the injection. Blah, blah, blah. The symptom most frequently mentioned was a feverish sensation, often accompanied by headache, which was sometimes severe enough to cause loss of sleep. So, yes, there are some. Now, of course, if Barry is right, and this vaccine caused the whole thing, Frederick L. Gates, who was a first lieutenant, so not stupid, he would maybe have realized, that it was causing, that he'd caused the outbreak. And so is this study accurate? You know, why aren't there more dates? So, you know, the study, you know, it's all very scientific language. It's all very scientific, you know, very, and lots of highfalutin Frenchified words, yeah, which always raises my suspicions, yeah, just use plain English. So, yeah, the vaccine used was made in the laboratory of the Rockefeller Institute. So, there were, you know, definitely a Rockefeller vaccine. So, yeah, the Rockefeller Institute, I've covered that. They sent it to England, France, Belgium, Italy, and other countries. So, let's discuss that and see whether we think it holds up and whether that was definitely the cause of the Spanish flu. That was and by the way, there's a paper by John M. Barry, another Barry, and a book by him, and he's a bit of a Rockefeller sycophant, it has to be said. So this is part 5 of our sandwich, and all about the 1918 so-called Spanish flu, 50 to 100 million dead. Okay, and we're going to discuss, we discussed Kevin Barry's hypothesis that the pandemic was started in Camp Riley, Fort Riley, Camp Fundon, and started by a campaign of vaccination, an anti-meningitis vaccination, administered by Frederick L. Gates, and we talked about the study, which is posted up on PubMed. Okay. So, as he says, the Spanish flu mainly killed people in their prime, aged between 20 and 40, whereas a flu virus kills predominantly the very young, the very old, and the infirm. And this is well established in the literature, so there's no controversy about that. It was killing people between 20 and 40, and not the very young and the old, which flu usually does, either seasonal or so-called swine flu. So people in their prime had a stronger immune system, and it's thought that many were killed by a cytokine storm, which is where your immune system basically goes into overdrive and kills you. So if Kevin Barry's hypothesis is correct, then the Rockefeller Institute must have known what had happened. And the Rockefellers would have set about covering their tracks, and they would still be doing it. Doctors and researchers don't necessarily know that they're laboring in Rockefeller medicine, but they are, I'm afraid. They just don't know that the Rockefellers are pulling the strings, and have been ever since 1914. So it would not be surprising, if Kevin Barry was correct, it would not be surprising that we're fed endless stories about the search for the H1N1 virus that started it all, and, you know, excavating some poor Inuit who in the permafrost, who's supposed to have died of the Spanish flu. And yes, scientists have found the N1, you know, they found traces of the H1N1 virus. Well, I'm very skeptical about that, and whether I'm skeptical about whether they actually found an H1N1 virus at all. And anyway, you know, the Inuit who's supposed to have died from the Spanish flu might well have been an asymptomatic carrier of seasonal flu, because there's a study which shows, and we'll flash it up, there's a study which shows that lots of people are carriers of the H1N1 virus, and they're asymptomatic. So, you know, it doesn't really prove anything. You know, H1N1 virus, it's a generic flu virus. If the pandemic started at Fort Riley, how do we explain that there was a flu pandemic in 1889 to 1890, and that there was an outbreak in Étaples in France, at the British base in Étaples in France, between December 1916 and March 1917. And this is supposed to be identical in symptoms to the Spanish flu, which may have started later, but it looks as if there was already an outbreak. Also, it was reported in a newspaper in Madrid that there was an outbreak among the soldiers in Madrid, And apparently it was also, you know, they mentioned in passing that it was the same disease that many prisoners had as well. So that was and that was first reported in May. So it might have been going on for some time in May, April, May. So that's about simultaneously with the Fort Riley outbreak, which started in March 11th, when, you know, hundreds of men in Fort Riley started to go down with it. And they were all leaving for France. They were going on to trains, all coughing and spreading the disease, and then going onto ships, you know, dying on the ships, and hundreds of them all infected, and spreading it into the trenches and the bases, blah, blah, blah. So, and the outbreak in Spain was quite serious. So, you know, we poo-poo the idea that, oh, it's the Spanish flu. But it was a serious outbreak. 30% of Spanish citizens were affected by it eventually, and lots of them died, and it spread to Portugal. Okay. So, how do we explain this? Okay. Also, the soldiers would have been severely vitamin deficient. Okay, so I've got a diet sheet here. I haven't got a date, and I don't know where it's from, but it was obvious it's from the First World War. I found it in a book I bought on what soldiers were eating in the First World War. I got it on a Kindle version, and yeah. So it looks as if it's at a base somewhere. It's not. You know, it's not what the soldiers were eating in the trenches, but it would have been. It's some kind of set up behind the trenches. Quite a large base, I think. And this, I don't know if you can see that, we'll flash it up. That is the original, yeah? It's written in pencil, and it says diet sheet for week. Okay, so we can see here, we can see what they're eating. So it's a battalion. So we've got, for each day of the week, we've got battalion breakfast and left hall battalion dinners. So it looks as if they were feeding the battalion in 2 shifts, yeah? Left hall battalion dinners, right hall battalion dinners. And they're quite well fed. There's a lot of protein. There's a lot of meat. I mean, you know, the meat would have been terrible probably, but you know, terrible quality. And although, you know, I don't know. I'm just guessing here. But it's all stodge. It's stodge and meat, and very few vegetables. So, for example, Sunday we've got for breakfast we've got tea, bread, butter, kippers. So kippers, good protein. Dinners, left hall battalion. Something meat, something which I can't read, but it's meat. Potatoes, plain pudding, so lots of stodge. Right hall battalion dinners, fish stew. I think it's fish stew. I couldn't read it very well. Dumplings, bread and butter pudding. And then battalion tea, bread, butter, sultana cake. So sultanas, yeah, maybe a little bit of... yeah, but there would be vitamin C in sultanas, but it would have been baked, and that would have killed the vitamin C. And then you've got battalion supper, bread, cheese, and pickles, so more protein, but more stodge. And they're eating quite a lot of butter. So with breakfast, it's tea, bread, butter. Monday it's tea, bread, butter, and bacon. Then another day they have sausages. Another day they have fritters. Another day they have rissoles. So a lot of, and it's well reported that a lot of the recruits into the British Army in 1918, they went into the army very puny and they came out well built. So that would, you know, there's plenty of protein here, but really no vitamin C at all. We got carrots on Tuesday at the dinners, carrots, but that would have probably come out of a tin, I should guess, and you know, the vitamins would have been killed. There would have been good vitamin A in the butter, so they would have been getting enough vitamin A, I think, or sufficient vitamin A. Yeah, watercress on Monday, so that's very good, very healthy. Watercress, there would have been a bit of vitamin C in the watercress on Monday. That was with the battalion tea, yeah, bread, butter, and watercress. And then we got beetroot salad on Tuesday, so beetroot, very good. That's a superfood. But did it come out of a tin, or was it fresh? And then we got bread, butter, and jam, lots of cakes. On Saturday, we got bread and something, and then lettuce, very good again. So lettuce, that would have been fresh. You know, you can't get lettuce out of a tin. So, you know, how much vitamin C is in lettuce? I don't think there's any. And we've got soups here. We've got pea soup. This is battalion supper, yeah? So we've got Sunday bread, cheese and pickles, Monday pea soup, tomato soup, barley soup, lentil soup, vegetable soup. But I think that would have come out of a tin. And anyway, the fact of cooking it would have killed any vitamin C. So there's virtually no vitamin C in this diet, none at all. I mean, just a tiny, tiny little bit, a bit of watercress, and that's it. Yeah, watercress, and that's it. So they would have been completely vitamin D deficient. They would have been, they would have all have had subclinical scurvy. You know, they might not have had full-blown scurvy, but they would have had subclinical scurvy. So is that the reason they got, you know, they got flu? Yes, it could be part of the reason, but I don't think it's the whole story. I think it would have made them they would have had very little resistance to any infection. And this was really a superbug. It wasn't just a, you know, and the soldiers in Madrid, you know, the Spanish eat well generally. So I think the soldiers in Madrid would have been eating well in their garrison. Yeah, the Spanish citizens as well, you know, in May, in the summer, they would have been getting good vegetables and fruit, I think, you know, all the oranges in Spain. So I don't think, you know, the vitamin C deficiency could have explained some of it. But I don't think that's the whole story. This was a superbug. Yeah, this was a deadly superbug. So I think that Kevin Barry was wrong when he said the vaccine was experimental. I think what made him draw that conclusion was that the study was that he quoted from Frederick Gates was in the Journal of Experimental Medicine. But according to the Rockefeller Institute booklet, this was not as far as they were concerned, it was not an experimental vaccine. And they sent it all over the place. They sent it to many countries. Now, did they send it to Spain? I think it's highly likely. They give a list of countries they've sent it to. Spain's not included, but they say others. So I think the garrison at Madrid was vaccinated with this vaccine, or maybe another vaccine, maybe not the anti-meningitis vaccine, maybe another of the Rockefeller vaccines. And could the Germans have used that vaccine? I think that's likely, because I think the vaccine could have been sent to Germany before 1914, before the outbreak of war. So I think the Germans could have used it. We need to find out this. We need to research. We need to find out where, you know, where these Rockefeller vaccines were used, because I think that that's what's caused it. And they made gallons of the stuff. I'll flash up again the excerpt from their booklet. They made, I mean, just gallons of the stuff. You know, how many soldiers or prisoners, because prisoners are another, you know, likely subject, another captive audience for their bloody vaccines. So, you know, how many were vaccinated? I mean, just gallons of the stuff. So let me quote you from this. Yes, I think that's what's caused. I think that's what's caused the outbreak in Etaples. I think that's what's caused the outbreak in Madrid and the outbreak in Kansas, in Fort Riley. So let me quote you here a few things, yeah? So this is Miller's critical review of vaccine studies, yeah? So I'm on page 116, and he's quoting here a study by Gandon and McKinnon and all et al. In a journal in 2003, Proc Biol Sci, I don't know what that is. Let me quote this. So there's two things. Imperfect vaccines promote the evolution of more virulent strains of the disease. That's one study. And then vaccines that provide incomplete immunity encourage the evolution of more virulent pathogen strains and deadly infections. So let me read the bullet points on this page, yeah? Vaccines can be formulated to A, reduce the probability of becoming infected by a disease-causing pathogen, or B, diminish the growth rate of the pathogen residing within the human host. So far, so good. So that's what the anti-meningitis vaccine was for. Different vaccination strategies have non-intuitive consequences for the evolution, adaptation of the pathogen, and the effects that vaccination will have on the total or long-term disease burden. In other words, non-intuitive consequences means, you know, things aren't going to go as planned. So vaccines that are designed to reduce the growth rate of parasites within their hosts produce conditions that actually increase parasite virulence and prevent eradication of the disease. So by giving the anti-meningitis vaccine, you're making it more likely, you're making any subsequent disease more virulent, and you're not going to prevent the eradication of the disease. High vaccination rates especially can have negative consequences for the host population by enhancing the hostile nature of the parasite, which can increase prevalence of the disease, precluding its elimination. In other words, the parasite can mutate and become more deadly. By parasite, they mean, virus or bacteria, yeah, or possibly a parasite as well, in the true sense. Evolution impels the parasite family to avoid extinction by adapting to a new environment, the vaccinated hosts. Even when parasite evolution does not occur, intermediate vaccination rates in a host population may still cause negative consequences if the risk of serious illness increases with the age of the host. Now, here's the other page. Vaccines that provide incomplete immunity encourage the evolution of more virulent pathogen strains and deadly infections. Vaccines designed to reduce pathogen growth rate and/or toxicity diminish selection against virulent pathogens. The subsequent evolution leads to higher levels of intrinsic virulence and hence a more severe disease in unvaccinated individuals. Well, that would explain why, the spread was so contagious. So, the soldiers were vaccinated, but, the civilian population wasn't. This evolution can erode any population-wide benefits, such that overall mortality rates are unaffected or even increase with the level of vaccination coverage. We find that the use of either anti-growth or anti-transmission vaccines leads to the evolution of pathogens with an increased within-host growth rate. Infection of unvaccinated hosts with such evolved pathogens results in high host mortality. Imperfect vaccines promote the evolution of virulent pathogen strains that result in deadly infections. Okay, so now I'm going to read from Plague Time by Paul Ewald, who's an evolutionary biologist, quite eminent. He's written some very popular books. This is a big seller, Plague Time. He's talking about making designer bugs biological terrorism, and he says in this it's unlikely because it's unlikely to happen because it's so difficult to do. But let's read what he says. Here we go. To generate a pathogen that would be both highly damaging and transmissible after being released in a human population, pathogens would need to be transferred among humans in the same way that virulent pathogens can be generated in an animal species, by transferring the pathogen among many individuals of that host species. This option is so abhorrent to most people that we should be able to suppress it. Even if a psychotic individual was willing to do such research, the project would have to be so large and the probability of being appalled would be so great for those involved that word would probably get out. When the word did get out, it would most likely be possible to obtain overwhelming approval for drastic measures to end the work, blah, 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 and remove from power those who instigated it. Well, we're not saying that the Rockefellers and the Rockefeller Institute did this on purpose, but this is exactly what's happened here, yeah? So, a virulent pathogen. What was a virulent pathogen? These vaccines were made in horses, yeah? Completely dangerous. I mean, what horse pathogen could have been in the vaccine? Could have been anything. Kevin Barry, in his original article, he talked about the similarity between the symptoms of men in the army camps who are suddenly dying from this disease and the horse disease called strangles. Now, I went to get that, to copy that, to flash it up on the video, and he's deleted it. Why has he deleted it? Has somebody been putting pressure on him? It sounds like a good hypothesis to me. Also, horses have a flu. Horses have a kind of flu. You know, could that have been in the vaccine, horse flu? I mean, if it could kill a horse, what's it going to do to a human? And strangles is when the horse basically drowns in its own fluid, fills the lungs, and it basically drowns. It strangles it. And that's what was happening with the men struck down with the Spanish flu. So there we have it. So this is a terrible lesson for us. So Miller's review of critical vaccine studies again. So let's just have a look at some of the first few pages. Yeah. So developed nations that require the most vaccines tend to have the worst infant mortality rates. This is a study. Here's another study. Infants who receive the most vaccines have the worst hospitalization and death rates. Fully vaccinated children are significantly more likely to require emergency care than under-vaccinated children. Baby monkeys that were given vaccines according to the US vaccination schedule had abnormalities in the region of the brain affecting social and emotional development. Here's thimerosal is what they call an adjuvant. Various adjuvants you can put in for vaccines. It's supposed to stimulate the immune system and make it more likely for the vaccine to work. So thimerosal is mercury. Infants who received vaccines containing mercury had significantly increased odds of being diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder. You've heard that before, haven't you? Yeah? Infants who received vaccines containing mercury developed speech disorders, sleep disorders, and autism. Blah, blah, and it goes on, yeah? All the different studies on vaccines, critical. And these are proper studies, yeah? This isn't alternative medicine. This is studies in PubMed, yeah? So in the US, the vaccination schedule for birth to 15 months, 15 vaccinations, and of course some of those it's 1, 2, 3, it's you know, several doses. 18 months to 18 years, 15, so that's 30 vaccinations an American will receive. It's frightening, it's really frightening. So this pandemic this 1918 pandemic has some lessons for us. In 1976, you'll see my two videos following this video, the 1976 flu fiasco, swine flu fiasco. That was, you know, it was a hoax. There was no pandemic. 22 million Americans were vaccinated. Some 500 of them got Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is paralysis. Some recovered, some didn't. $5 billion of sales for the vaccines, or nearly $5 billion, and probably close to that in profits. And in 2009, another swine flu hoax. This time, $7 to $10 billion of profits and lots of adverse effects. Again, lots of people in the UK had narcolepsy, various adverse effects, and these hoaxes. They used the 1918 Spanish flu thing to whip us up and scare us to death and get us all to get vaccinated. So 65 million vaccinations in 2009 with this swine flu hoax. The WHO declared a pandemic, but there was no pandemic, it was a load of rubbish. So terrible lesson for us. We're all, this in 2009, there was this huge all these soldiers, vitamin D deficient soldiers with a dodgy vaccine. It was like a petri dish, yeah, to create a superbug bomb, and it could happen again. We've been deliberately misled to believe that we need fluoride in water. Fluoride is a poison, lowers the IQ. We've been deliberately misled to believe that iodine damages the thyroid. We're all iodine deficient. Iodine deficiency lowers the IQ. We're eating GMO foods that we don't know about. Some, they're in processed foods, and God knows if we're getting, if we're eating GM foods without knowing about it. and also irradiated foods, covert irradiation. How many of the fruits and vegetables, particularly from South America, are irradiated? And those foods are terribly damaging. Those foods cause cancer. So, and they are nutritionally deficient. The irradiation damages the vitamins. So we're in poor shape. We're getting misinformation. We're not being properly informed. We're led to believe that we need medicine. That we're following the wrong model for health, and we could easily be wiped out by some deadly pathogen. And if it arrives, it will come in the form of probably come in the form of a vaccination, a dodgy vaccination, and maybe one that's forced upon us in some hoax or other. Some hoax from the World Health Organization that we all need to be immunized against some deadly disease, and that could cause it. That could cause the pandemic. So there we go. I forgot vitamin D deficiency. We're being told to keep out of the sun because it gives us cancer. How ludicrous is that? Yeah, we're being deliberately misinformed. Our health is deliberately being damaged. The idea is to get us so that our health is subpar, so they can fill us up with drugs. Yeah, and it's going to kill us all if we're not careful. Yeah, we need to wake up.